Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into one of the most, well, fundamental questions, really, of what it truly means to be human. How do we genuinely come to know ourselves? And maybe more specifically, how do we form something as core, as foundational as our identity?
Right.
Now, for you, our listener, who we know brings this really rich background in elementary education and, fascinatingly, a newfound interest in psychology and identity. Well, this deep dive is going to be particularly insightful, I think.
I hope so.
We're going to try and unravel the intricate ways we form our sense of self, and crucially, how understanding that whole process can profoundly reshape our approach to others, especially those young, unfolding minds in the earliest stages of life, right there in your very own classroom.
That's precisely right. Our specific focus today is on something that might, maybe at first, sound quite specific: sexual identity development.
Okay.
But here's what's truly revolutionary about the research we're exploring, and perhaps a little surprising. It reveals that sexual identity isn't some niche topic,
Right, not just for certain groups.
Exactly. Instead, it's presented as a universal human process. And it offers this incredibly powerful lens through which we can understand all forms of identity formation.
Okay.
The academic research we're diving into, Sexual Identity as a Universal Process, by Dylan, Worthington, and Moratti, it provides this comprehensive, unifying model. It genuinely moves beyond these narrow, often, let's be honest, binary categories, and helps us see a much bigger, more inclusive picture of human development.
Absolutely. So our mission for this deep dive is crystal clear then. We're here to cut through the, let's say, density of academic text and extract those truly surprising facts and fundamental insights from this robust research. We want to help you gain a well-informed perspective quickly, kind of getting straight to the heart of what matters.
Yeah, cut to the chase.
Exactly. And as you pointed out, we'll be consistently exploring how those early experiences, even the most subtle ones, in the elementary classroom, lay crucial groundwork for these lifelong identity journeys. It's really about recognizing that identity isn't some sudden emergence in adolescence, right? But rather a seed planted much, much earlier in childhood, growing and evolving throughout life.
Couldn't agree more. This new perspective, it captures shared experiences across all different identity groups, whether someone eventually identifies as heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or any other part of the diverse spectrum.
Right.
And for you as an educator, the immense value here is that it provides a framework, a way to understand every student's developing sense of self, rather than focusing only on specific groups or assuming certain developmental paths are the only ones.
That sounds incredibly useful.
It truly fosters an inclusive mindset from the ground up, really allowing you to support each child in their unique journey of self-discovery.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we dive specifically into sexual identity, let's maybe get on the same page about what identity actually means in psychology. It's one of those words, isn't it? Gets thrown around a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
So having a clear definition from a psychological standpoint feels, well, essential.
That's a fantastic starting point because you're absolutely right. Identity can mean so many things in everyday talk.
Yeah.
In psychology, though, we build on foundational work by, pioneering thinkers like Erikson back in the 50s and Marcy in the 80s. Identity is defined as a stable sense of one's goals, beliefs, values, and life roles.
Okay, stable. What exactly does that mean here? Not fixed.
Good question. Not fixed, no. Stable here means more like a coherent core, something that provides continuity to who you are over time, even as things change.
Got it.
It's not just a single isolated trait, but more like, I like the analogy of a rich, intricate tapestry. It's woven from many, many different threads. These threads include fundamental aspects like your gender, your race, ethnicity, social class, spirituality, and of course, the focus today, your sexuality. So it's a composite, really, a complex whole of who you believe yourself to be, what drives you, what you stand for, and, your unique place in the world.
That's a powerful image.
And it's absolutely critical to grasp that identity development is a dynamic process.
Right, not static.
Not at all. It's not a fixed destination you arrive at, like, graduating from school and suddenly, poof, you know everything about yourself.
If only.
Exactly. Instead, it's a continuous, often lifelong journey. Think of it as continually assessing who you are, actively exploring different possibilities, maybe trying things out, and then making commitments to an integrated set of these various identity elements. It's fluid, it evolves, and it's profoundly influenced by our experiences and interactions throughout our entire lives, from childhood right through adulthood.
I love that image of a tapestry. It's such a beautiful way to think about how all these different aspects intertwine and are constantly being maybe rewoven.
Precisely. Rewoven is a great word for it.
And for you, our listener, with your background in elementary education, this concept of a dynamic, lifelong process starting much, much earlier than adolescence.
Well, that really resonates, doesn't it? Children aren't just, empty vessels waiting to be filled with knowledge.
Not in the slightest. They're already active participants in this identity-weaving journey.
Exactly. For elementary educators, this means recognizing that children, even in kindergarten or first grade, they're already beginning to explore their early sense of self. They're figuring out their likes and dislikes. You hear it all the time.
Oh, yeah. I love to draw. I don't like broccoli.
Mhm.
I prefer playing with blocks over dolls.
Precisely. And they're forming initial beliefs and values. It's important to share my toys, or we should always be kind to our classmates. And they're certainly exploring their life roles within the classroom and their family. Who gets to be the line leader today or the snack helper? Who are they in relation to their peers and teachers? What responsibilities do they enjoy or maybe shy away from? These are all early explorations of self.
So those little classroom jobs are actually part of identity formation.
Absolutely. Teachers play an incredibly vital role in fostering this early identity development by encouraging self-expression through things like art, dramatic play, storytelling, or even just letting children choose their reading nook during quiet time. You help them understand and articulate their preferences.
Right, giving them agency.
Exactly. Assigning responsibilities like being the class librarian or plant waterer helps them understand and commit to these nascent life roles, teaching them about their contributions and capabilities, and establishing clear classroom kindness rules, then discussing why they're important, how they make everyone feel safe and valued. That helps children form their ethical and social values. These seemingly simple everyday interactions, they're the fundamental building blocks.
Laying the groundwork.
Laying the essential groundwork for that complex tapestry of identity we discussed. It truly reinforces that the elementary years are profoundly foundational for who a child will eventually become.
It's truly fascinating how those seemingly small, everyday classroom moments can be so foundational. Now, you mentioned that past research often focused on specific groups when it came to sexual identity, for instance. Models designed exclusively for lesbian, gay, bisexual, or heterosexual individuals.
That's right.
But here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite illuminating.
Yeah.
Our source material makes some crucial distinctions that help us move beyond those labels and truly understand the nuances of how sexual identity forms for everyone.
Yes, this is a really key part of the model. The authors make three crucial distinctions. These terms, sexual orientation identity, and sexual identity, they're often used interchangeably in everyday conversation. Right? But in this model, they have very specific, separate meanings, and disentangling them is really the key to a deeper understanding.
Okay, let's break them down.
All right, first, there's sexual orientation. This refers to an individual's deeply ingrained patterns of sexual, romantic, and affectional arousal and desire for other persons based on those persons' gender and sex characteristics.
So, the deep-seated attraction.
Exactly. The American Psychological Association clarified this back in 2009. It's often linked to deep-seated physiological drives and strong emotional feelings, like experiencing the undeniable pull of falling in love with someone.
Right.
And crucially, for the majority of people, it's largely considered to be beyond conscious choice. It's seen as an innate aspect of who you are. Our source suggests that for most people, sexual orientation tends to be stable across the lifespan.
Okay, stable, innate attraction. Got it.
To give you an analogy, think of sexual orientation as your internal North Star. It's the direction your deep desires naturally point. It's an innate pull, a fundamental attraction.
I like that, the North Star.
Then we have sexual orientation identity. Now, this is quite different from just the North Star itself. This is the conscious acknowledgement and internalization of one's sexual orientation.
So, how you understand and label that attraction.
Precisely. It's about how an individual labels or understands their own orientation to themselves and potentially to others. This concept is much more linked to relational and interpersonal factors. It influences your sense of community, the social supports you seek out, the role models you connect with, the nature of your friendships and partnerships.
So it's more social and conscious.
Yes, and here's where it gets particularly fluid and dynamic. Sexual orientation identity is considered more flexible. It can actually change across different contexts, relationships, and life stages, even if the underlying desires that North Star remain consistent.
That's a really important distinction.
It is. So using our analogy, sexual orientation identity is when you look at your compass, you recognize where it's pointing, and then you decide to call that direction home or my path.
Yeah.
It's your self-assigned label, your personal understanding of yourself in relation to that orientation. It's how you choose to articulate and live with your inherent attractions.
Okay, so orientation is the pull. Orientation identity is how you label and understand that pull. What's the third one?
The third and the broadest construct is sexual identity. This is the overarching umbrella term that subsumes sexual orientation identity.
Okay, so it includes the label.
It does, but it expands far beyond that to include many other dimensions of human sexuality. This includes your specific sexual needs, your values around sex and relationships, your preferred modes of sexual expression, the characteristics you prefer in partners.
Wow, okay, it's much broader.
Much broader. And significantly, your group membership identity, meaning do you see yourself as part of a particular sexuality-related social group like the LGBTQ+ community or as part of the broader heterosexual community? And it also encompasses your attitudes towards sexual minority individuals and groups in general.
So your feelings about other groups too.
Yes. This all-encompassing concept acknowledges both the fluid and the stable aspects of identity, providing a truly holistic picture. So if sexual orientation is your North Star, and sexual orientation identity is recognizing that star and naming your path, then sexual identity is the entire map of your journey. It's not just where your compass points, but also the landmarks you encounter, the routes you choose or don't choose, the people you travel with, and how you feel about other travelers on different paths. It's comprehensive, complex, and, ever-evolving.
That's incredibly helpful. Wow. It really clarifies a lot of everyday observations, doesn't it?
I think so.
So what does this all mean when we connect it back to the real world? This distinction helps us understand why someone might confidently identify as straight, but still acknowledge experiencing, say, some same-sex attractions.
Exactly.
Or why the language around identity keeps evolving. You hear terms like bicurious, heteroflexible, pansexual. It's because the sexual identity is so much broader and more dynamic than just the underlying sexual orientation.
Precisely. And this nuanced understanding is critical when we look at how identity has historically been measured in research. It kind of explains some of the challenges. Well, for example, early tools like the Kinsey scale, revolutionary for its time back in the 1940s, absolutely provided a 0-6 continuum, exclusively heterosexual at one end, exclusively homosexual at the other.
Right, I remember that.
But it was inherently binary in its approach. It assumed that desire for one sex meant a reduced or absent desire for the other. It was presented as an either-or situation.
Which doesn't capture everything.
Not at all. Modern, multidimensional models, however, now recognize that desires for same-sex and other-sex individuals can coexist relatively independently. You can rate the intensity of your desire for different genders separately, allowing for a much more nuanced understanding of sexual diversity. This moves us away from that simplistic, limiting either-or framework.
That feels much more realistic.
It does. The source also highlights a persistent problem in the academic literature: inconsistent terms, methods, and concepts.
The academic jargon problem.
Well, it's more than that. Think about it. How scholars define and operationalize sexual orientation or sexual identity can vary wildly across studies and decades.
Right, making comparisons difficult.
Incredibly challenging to compare findings directly. And then there are the historical shifts in self-ascriptions, the actual words people use to describe themselves. Terms like queer, metrosexual, pansexual, disidentified, transamorous. They've all emerged, evolved, sometimes faded.
Language changes so fast.
It does, making it difficult to track trends or compare experiences across different generations. This ongoing linguistic evolution really reflects the dynamic nature of identity itself. What's particularly fascinating here is how the authors propose that sexual orientation can be conceptualized as having both essentialist components, suggesting some biological or innate, unchanging determinants.
Okay, get the nature part.
Kind of, yeah. And constructionist components, where sociocultural influences play a strong role in shaping and giving meaning to sexual identity.
The nurture part.
Exactly. This unified model attempts to capture both these fluid and stable aspects. It acknowledges that while core attractions might be stable for many, how a person understands, labels, and expresses their identity can be quite dynamic and profoundly influenced by their environment, their relationships, the broader social context.
So it's both nature and nurture interacting.
That's the idea. For instance, research by Diamond on women's same-sex attractions found something really interesting. While women's acknowledged identities, the labels they used varied as contexts and relationships changed.
Uh-huh.
Their overall levels of sexual desire and attraction generally did not change significantly. This really underscores that crucial distinction between the underlying orientation, the North Star, and the fluid identity, the map and path.
Wow, okay, that's a powerful piece of evidence for that distinction.
Mhm.
So if we recap, before this comprehensive unifying model came along, a lot of the groundbreaking work, especially for sexual minority individuals, was really focused on a coming out process.
That's a good way to put it.
It was very group-specific, almost as if identity development only applied to certain groups, or was only interesting for certain groups.
Exactly. Previous models of sexual identity development often focus very narrowly on specific subgroups, particularly gay men and lesbians, and largely because these were the populations whose identities diverged from the dominant heterosexual norm.
Yeah, they were more visible. Maybe.
More visible, and their developmental journeys were often more fraught with challenges due to societal stigma. For example, Cass's 1979 model was truly foundational. It described this multi-stage process for gay men and lesbians, moving from initial confusion and comparison through tolerance, acceptance, pride, and ultimately identity synthesis.
Right, the classic stages.
It was crucial in helping us understand the impact of stigma and the milestones individuals navigated as they became aware of and formed their identity. However, while incredibly important, this model was later considered more descriptive of the psychological and social process of coming out. The acceptance and disclosure of one's sexual orientation, identity to oneself and others, rather than a comprehensive model of broader, lifelong identity development. It was somewhat limited in scope, not fully accounting for all aspects of sexual identity or the experiences of other groups, like bisexual or heterosexual individuals.
So, a vital first step, but not the whole picture.
Precisely. Building on that, Fassinger and colleagues in 1996 produced more sophisticated models of lesbian and gay identity development. Their models included 4 phases: awareness, exploration, deepening commitment, and internalization synthesis.
So it's more detailed.
It was, and what was particularly distinct and innovative about Fassinger's work was its conceptualization of both individual identity development and group membership identity development phases.
So the personal and the social together.
Exactly. So, for example, in the awareness phase, an individual might internally recognize, I feel different, or I'm having same-sex attractions. That's the individual level. While at the group level, they simultaneously acknowledge that, different sexual orientations actually exist in society. And importantly, these individual and group phases don't necessarily occur in parallel. They can be out of sync.
How so?
Well, a person might internally commit to a lesbian identity. Maybe they even have a same-sex partner, feel confident in their attractions, but still be at an earlier stage at the group level.
Maybe.
Meaning they haven't yet disclosed their identity widely, or they aren't engaging actively with the LGBTQ+ community, or maybe they're even facing external pressures that prevent open self-identification. This distinction was critical for understanding the complexities of coming out and living authentically.
So while these models were crucial for the groups they studied, they clearly had significant limitations, as you said. They weren't designed to be universal, and they left out a lot of people's experiences.
Precisely. The main limitations of these group-specific models were quite profound. First, as we've said, primarily designed for very specific populations, gay men and lesbians, and didn't easily generalize to others, like bisexual or heterosexual individuals.
Well.
For example, to even complete the research instruments associated with some of Fassinger's models, a participant had to explicitly identify as gay or lesbian first.
Which excludes people questioning, or bisexual people, or...
Exactly. Immediately excluded a large segment of the population. Second, these models often neglected crucial individual differences that profoundly impact identity formation. Things like race, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic class, geographic location, or religious background.
Intersectionality, basically.
Exactly. A person's racial identity or religious upbringing, for instance, can deeply influence how they experience, explore, and express their sexual identity, yet these factors were often not explicitly integrated into the earlier models. The coming out narrative often centered on a specific, often white middle-class experience without fully accounting for the layered complexities of intersectional identities.
That's a major oversight.
It really was. When it came to bisexual identity development, the literature explicitly acknowledged it as unique and often profoundly misunderstood. Kinsey had long ago suggested bisexuality was far more common than perceived. Weinberg and colleagues in 1994 described a multi-stage model specifically for bisexual identity. It included initial confusion, finding and applying a label, settling into the identity, and even continued uncertainty, which is a key part of the bisexual experience for many.
Continued uncertainty. Interesting.
Yeah, and they emphasize a crucial point. Becoming bisexual involves the rejection of not one, but two recognized categories of sexual identity.
Wow. Rejecting both gay and straight norms.
Exactly. This highlights the unique pressures faced by bisexual individuals who often feel caught between or excluded by both gay and straight communities, struggling to fit neatly into that pervasive gay-straight dichotomy. Their research confirmed bisexuality as a unique and legitimate identity, and importantly, showed significant within-group differences among bisexual individuals, debunking common stereotypes that bisexuality is just a phase or a stepping stone.
So much more complex than often portrayed.
Much more. Then there's heterosexual identity development, which was, and arguably still is, a relatively new and significantly understudied area.
Really? It seems like the default, you wouldn't think it needed studying.
That was the assumption for a long time. If you weren't gay or lesbian, you were just straight, and there was no developmental process to it. But researchers began to challenge this. Eliason, in 1995, found that identity foreclosure, remember, commitment without active exploration.
Yeah.
That was common among heterosexual undergraduate students. Many simply accepted their heterosexual identity as a given without conscious thought or examination.
Just took it for granted.
Pretty much. Interestingly, a large percentage were also found to be in identity diffusion. Not because they were struggling with their attractions, but because they were confused about what sexual identity even meant for them as heterosexuals. It just wasn't something they'd ever had to think about.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Isn't it? Other researchers, like Sullivan in 1998, even applied concepts from racial identity development to describe how heterosexual identities develop, particularly in the context of homophobia and heterosexism. Moore, in 2002, conceptualized how heterosexual therapists' own unexamined identity development could inadvertently create barriers to effective practice with LGB clients.
So their own lack of exploration could be a blind spot.
Potentially, yes. And Worthington and colleagues in 2002 proposed a comprehensive model where sexual orientation was just one of 6 dimensions of a broader heterosexual identity, influenced by a complex interplay of biopsychosocial factors, biology, microsocial influences, gender, culture, religion, systemic forces like pervasive homonegativity.
So the overall point here is that while all those previous models were incredibly valuable for their specific populations and shed light on crucial aspects of identity, they really had major limitations when it came to generalizability.
Absolutely.
And that's where this new unifying model steps in, right? It truly fills that significant gap.
You've got it. The source material emphasizes that a new, truly unifying model was not just beneficial, but desperately needed. It aims to integrate key findings and insights from all existing research covering LGBT, bisexual, and heterosexual identity development into a single, comprehensive framework that can apply to all sexual orientations.
That sounds like a huge undertaking.
It is, and it's fundamentally crucial because it allows us to understand the full, beautiful spectrum of human sexuality and explicitly recognizes that everyone develops a sexual identity, not just those who identify as sexual minorities or who are coming out. It normalizes identity development as a universal human experience.
Which is so important.
It really is. And for you as an elementary teacher, this unifying model is absolutely invaluable. Instead of thinking of identity development as something that only applies to certain students or something that only starts in adolescence when kids begin asking questions about attraction or dating, it helps you see all students as being on a unique and continuous identity journey. This perspective profoundly encourages you to create an inclusive and affirming environment from day one where all children feel seen, respected, and where their emerging sense of self, whatever it may be, is celebrated and affirmed, without imposing rigid categories or making limiting assumptions about their future identities.
It helps you meet every child where they are.
Exactly. It prepares them for a healthier, more integrated sense of self throughout their lives.
This unifying model truly expands our understanding then. It introduces 5 distinct statuses, you said. And crucially, they're not necessarily a rigid linear path. That's key.
Absolutely key.
It's much more like a journey with different stages you might move through or even revisit throughout your life. It sounds incredibly flexible and human.
It is, very much so. The core of this unifying model proposes two parallel yet reciprocal developmental determinants that constantly influence each other.
Okay, two tracks running side by side.
Kind of, yeah, and influencing each other. On one hand, you have the individual sexual identity development process. This is how you internally acknowledge, define, and make sense of your sexual needs, your personal values related to sexuality, your orientation, your preferences for sexual activities, your modes of sexual expression, the characteristics you find appealing in potential partners. It's all about your internal landscape of sexuality, your personal truth.
The inner world.
Right. On the other hand, there's the social identity process. This involves your understanding, whether it's implicit or explicit, of your membership in either a privileged dominant group, like heterosexuals, or a marginalized minority group, such as gay, lesbian, or bisexual identities.
So where you fit in society.
Exactly. And this also includes your corresponding attitudes, beliefs, and values with respect to members of other sexual identity groups. For instance, do you hold affirming views, or are there biases? These two processes, the individual and the social, interact dynamically within 5 discernible statuses. And as you noted, these statuses are nonlinear, flexible, and fluid. People can revisit them or move through them in different orders throughout their lives, sometimes even cycling back depending on new experiences or challenges.
So not a ladder you climb once.
Definitely not. It's more like a landscape you explore, with many different paths and terrains.
Okay, let's dive into these 5 statuses. I'm really curious now, especially thinking about how they might show up, even in early forms in the classroom.
Great. So first, we encounter compulsory heterosexuality. This concept, originally coined by the influential Adrienne Rich back in 1980, and later adopted by scholars like Moore in 2002. It describes the default starting point for most people in Western societies, regardless of their actual sexual orientation.
The societal default setting.
That's a great way to put it. It's the pervasive, often invisible societal assumption that heterosexuality is normal, universal, and the only natural attraction between men and women. Think about how deeply ingrained this is in our culture. From media and advertising to family narratives, it's constantly reinforced.
Everywhere you look, basically.
Pretty much. It's an externally imposed identity, reflecting powerful societal mandates for appropriate gender roles and sexual behavior. It often exists without much conscious thought or consideration of alternatives. And in that way, it closely resembles Marcy's foreclosed identity status, remember, commitment without genuine exploration.
Right, accepting without questioning.
Exactly. It's the path of least resistance because society has already paved it so smoothly.
So people in this status aren't necessarily choosing heterosexuality after consciously considering alternatives. It's simply the assumed, unexamined norm they've absorbed from birth. They just fall into it, like gravity.
Precisely. That's a good analogy. People in this status tend to operate almost entirely within culturally prescribed norms, accepting the presumption of heterosexuality as normal, good, and universal without question. They might deny or repress any awareness that heterosexuals are a privileged group in society, or simply accept this privilege as natural and justifiable rather than a social construct.
Unaware of the system.
Often, yes. Their attitudes towards sexual minorities are typically group depreciating, often reflecting a lack of understanding, prejudice, or even active condemnation, as Herrick's work suggested back in '84. They might assume everyone in their immediate social circles, their friends, family, classmates, is heterosexual, simply because that's the unquestioned default in their world.
Is just what they know.
Right. They might even express discomfort or confusion if confronted with non-heterosexual identities, maybe not out of malice, but because it genuinely challenges their deeply ingrained, unexamined worldview.
Okay, so how does this show up with young kids?
In the elementary classroom, a teacher might observe this in children's casual play or conversations. For example, when children exclusively draw pictures of families with a mother and a father, without any other variations. Or when their conversations about future relationships only involve different gender pairings, asking, "Who's your boyfriend/girlfriend?" Or, "When you grow up, who will your wife/husband be?" as default questions without considering other possibilities.
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
You do. Even subtle things like only selecting books for the classroom library that depict heterosexual families, or having classroom activities that reinforce traditional gender roles. Boys like sports, girls like crafts. Boys are strong, girls are gentle. that can inadvertently reinforce compulsory heterosexuality. A student might express discomfort or confusion about same-sex relationships or even gender non-conforming expressions based on these absorbed societal norms, even if they have little personal understanding of what those identities entail.
So it's about the environment reinforcing these norms.
Yeah, absolutely. For educators, recognizing compulsory heterosexuality as a powerful, often unconscious societal force helps you understand that children are socialized into these norms very early on, without choice or awareness. This highlights the critical importance of being mindful of your language, ensuring diverse family representations in learning materials like displaying books with different family structures, posters depicting various family types, and actively challenging gender stereotypes in conversations and activities.
It's about broadening their horizons early.
Exactly. Creating a classroom space where all forms of identity can eventually be explored and affirmed, rather than foreclosed by external pressures. It's about building a foundation of broad acceptance and open-mindedness, preparing children for a world that is far more diverse than what compulsory heterosexuality dictates.
That makes so much sense. It's not about forcing specific conversations, but about creating an environment where a child isn't confined to a single assumed path, which leads us perfectly into the next status, active exploration. This sounds like a significant shift from that default.
Yes, active exploration is where things truly begin to shift, often quite dramatically. This status involves a purposeful exploration, evaluation, or experimentation of one's sexual needs, values, orientation, and/or preferences.
Purposeful being the key word there.
Yes. And this exploration isn't always overt. It can be entirely cognitive, like fantasizing, reading about different relationship dynamics, engaging in deep thought, seeking information online. Or it can be behavioral, involving experimentation with activities or relationships.
Okay.
What critically distinguishes it from compulsory heterosexuality is the questioning or the active abandonment of those socially mandated aspects of heterosexuality. It very much resembles Marcia's moratorium identity status.
The time out to figure things out.
Exactly. A suspension of commitment in favor of active, deliberate exploration. It's a period of intentional searching.
So it's not just random curiosity. It's a deliberate, focused process of self-discovery.
Exactly. It tends to be highly goal-directed. Now, contextual influences like family expectations, cultural norms, religious beliefs, they can certainly constrain or promote exploration within certain socially acceptable boundaries.
Sure.
But active exploration happens when an individual consciously engages in cognitive or behavioral inquiry that goes beyond what's simply socially mandated within their immediate environment. For sexual minority individuals, this often involves a growing awareness of same-sex attractions or gender diversity, which may lead to a profound relabeling of their sexual orientation identity, perhaps from an assumed heterosexual identity to lesbian, gay, or bisexual.
Wow.
This is a significant internal and often external process.
Right, a big shift.
Huge. For heterosexual individuals, exploration might occur primarily within assumed straight boundaries, maybe focusing more on specific sexual activities or partner characteristics, excluding gender as a variable. However, it might also involve consciously experimenting with symbolic or even real same-sex activities while still identifying as straight, sometimes maybe to maintain social privilege or simply to explore all facets of their sexuality before settling into a heterosexual identity.
Interesting. That complexity is often missed.
It is. And a key finding from the research is that active self-exploration often correlates with more positive attitudes towards sexual minorities and significantly less self-stigma. It fosters a more open and accepting mindset.
So exploration breeds acceptance.
Often, yes. Now, in an elementary classroom, obviously overt sexual exploration isn't happening, but a teacher might observe very important precursors to active exploration.
Like what?
This could be a child exploring gender nonconforming interests or friendships, perhaps a boy gravitating strongly towards roles traditionally associated with girls in dramatic play, like being the mom or the ballet dancer, or a girl expressing intense crushes on other girls that seem to go beyond typical friendship, maybe exploring deeper affectional preferences. It's not about sexual acts at this age, but about cognitive or emotional exploration of preferences, interests, and attractions that might deviate, even subtly, from the compulsory heterosexuality norm they've absorbed.
So pushing boundaries in small ways.
Exactly. A teacher might notice a child questioning societal norms they've absorbed or showing curiosity about diverse relationships or family structures they encounter in books or discussions, asking questions like, Why do only boys play with trucks? Or can a family have two moms?
Those curious questions.
Those are gold mines. For educators, this means consciously creating an environment that genuinely supports healthy exploration of self-expression and identity. This means validating a child's diverse interests, their varied friendships, their unique expressions without judgment or redirection.
Letting them be.
And being genuinely open to discussing different types of families or relationships if brought up by students, reinforcing that different is okay, valid, and beautiful. By doing so, you subtly prepare children for later, more explicit identity exploration, giving them the emotional and cognitive tools to engage in it safely, with curiosity rather than fear. You're building a foundation of psychological safety.
Okay, that leads us to a status that sounds a bit more challenging and perhaps less intentional. Diffusion.
Yes, diffusion is quite complex and can manifest in different ways. It's fundamentally characterized by the absence of commitment and of systematic exploration as defined by Marcia.
So no commitment, no real searching.
Right. It's one of the more complex identity statuses in this model, and the literature identifies two distinct types. First, there's carefree diffusion. Here, an individual is largely unconcerned and content with not having strong commitments or having actively explored their identity. There's an apparent apathy regarding commitment and exploration. They might say, I don't care about defining myself, or whatever happens, happens.
Kind of going with the flow, maybe too much.
Perhaps. And then there's diffuse diffusion. This reflects a deeper underlying uncertainty or insecurity, and individuals in this state are often quite distressed by their lack of clear commitments or direction. They might express, I don't know who I am and it worries me.
So one is like, I don't care about the map, and the other is, I don't have a map and I'm really lost.
That's a perfect way to put it. Whether due to insecure apathy or a carefree lack of commitment, individuals in diffusion may be more likely to ignore or even actively reject social and cultural prescriptions for sexual values, behavior, and identity.
Pushing back against norms, maybe?
Possibly. Or just disengaged from them. If any exploration occurs, it's infrequent, random, and lacks the goal-directed intentionality characteristic of active exploration. It's more meandering. Right. While carefree diffusion may present without significant psychological distress, diffuse diffusion typically coincides with various forms of psychological distress, as noted by Schwartz and colleagues back in 2009. Individuals in this status may also express a significant lack of self-awareness about their underlying motives or feelings. The model suggests that individuals are vulnerable to entering this status from any other, but most likely from compulsory heterosexuality or active exploration, often when experiencing high levels of distress, for instance, from intense stigma, harassment, or maybe a traumatic experience associated with sexual exploration, or behaviors that are considered taboo. It's a place of uncertainty, sometimes chosen, sometimes imposed by difficult circumstances.
How might this look in a young child?
In the elementary classroom, a teacher might observe precursors to this in a child who seems generally disengaged, perhaps apathetic about their own interests, or consistently confused about their place in social groups. They might bounce between different interests or friend groups without forming deep connections or commitments to any particular activity or set of relationships.
Kind of drifting.
Yeah. In the case of diffuse diffusion, the child might show clear signs of anxiety, withdrawal, or distress related to their uncertainty about themselves or their place in social expectations. This isn't necessarily about sexual identity directly at this age, of course, but about a general difficulty in forming a coherent sense of self or engaging meaningfully with identity-related questions and social roles. They might struggle to articulate what they like or what they want to do.
So what can a teacher do?
This status highlights the profound importance of providing stable, supportive, and predictable classroom environments. It means consistently encouraging children to explore a wide range of interests, even if those interests change frequently, and offering gentle guidance in developing a sense of agency and self-awareness. Creating a space where uncertainty is seen as a normal part of growth, not a failure, and where children are given tools to articulate their feelings and preferences can significantly reduce distress and foster healthier identity development later on. You're helping them build the internal compass they need.
In moving towards a more solid, perhaps more settled sense of self, we have deepening and commitment.
Indeed. Deepening and commitment describes a clear movement toward greater conviction and personal investment in one's identified sexual needs, values, sexual orientation, and/or preferences for activities, partner characteristics, and modes of sexual expression. This status most closely resembles Marcia's achieved identity status,
Where you've explored and made a choice.
Well, here's a critical distinction in this unifying model from earlier identity theories. Commitment is hypothesized to be possible, or even likely, without prior active exploration, particularly for heterosexual individuals.
Oh, really? How does that work?
For example, heterosexual individuals might move directly from the status of compulsory heterosexuality into deepening and commitment. This means their commitment is contained entirely within their original unexamined societal presumption of heterosexuality. This results in what the source calls committed compulsory heterosexuality.
Committed compulsory heterosexuality.
Right, where there's a profound, unexamined, yet stable commitment to heterosexuality as the norm. These individuals are likely to maintain or even strengthen heterosexist assumptions and attitudes because they haven't had a reason to question them. They simply accept the dominant narrative as their own truth.
So they commit, but without having really explored other options. It's like they found their path, but only because it was the most obvious one, not necessarily because they deliberately walked every other path first. They've accepted the default with conviction.
Exactly. They've settled into a path that feels right, often because it aligns with societal expectations. And for them, there's no inherent conflict or compelling reason to explore alternatives. Conversely, for gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals, deepening and commitment almost always involves significant active exploration. This active inquiry, this journey of questioning and searching, is what yields deep self-understanding and clarity.
Because they have to question the default.
Exactly. Importantly, heterosexuals who have undergone active exploration, perhaps questioning gender norms or briefly considering same-sex attractions before confirming their heterosexual identity and then commit, are much more likely to question heterosexist assumptions about normative behavior and express less group-depreciating attitudes toward sexual minorities compared to those in committed compulsory heterosexuality.
So exploration makes a difference even if you end up identifying as straight.
Absolutely. For all individuals in this status, regardless of their orientation, group membership identity processes and attitudes towards sexual orientation, identity groups begin to deepen and crystallize. They form conscious, coherent perspectives on non-dominant group relations, privilege or loss of privilege, experiences of oppression or marginalization. They start to see how their own identity intersects with broader social structures.
They become more socially aware.
Yes. In the elementary classroom, this status would manifest as a child becoming more certain and confident in their interests, their friendships, or their chosen social roles within the classroom or peer group. They might commit passionately to certain activities. I'm a dancer and it's what I want to do every day. I love science and I'm going to be a scientist.
You see that passion develop.
You do. Or they might form a core, stable group of friends, clearly defining their social circle. While not directly sexual, this is the foundational process of solidifying one's sense of self and developing conviction. For a teacher, understanding that some students, who may grow into heterosexual adults, might form commitments without explicit exploration of alternatives means acknowledging that diverse paths to a stable identity exist.
Respecting different journeys.
Precisely. You can affirm a child's emergent self, whether that self aligns with societal norms or explores alternatives, without imposing expectations or requiring them to question things they don't feel compelled to question. It's about respecting their unique journey.
And finally, the most integrated adaptive status. Synthesis. This sounds like the ultimate goal of identity development, maybe.
It truly is presented as such. Synthesis is potentially the most mature and adaptive status in this model. It's characterized by a profound state of congruence between the individual and social identity processes.
Congruence. Everything fitting together.
Exactly. Here, a person achieves a deep, authentic understanding of their sexual identity that not only fulfills their self-definitions, but also positively influences their attitudes and behaviors towards all sexual identity groups, both LGBT-identified and heterosexually identified individuals.
Wow.
In synthesis, an individual's personal sexual identity, their understanding of their group membership, and their attitudes toward dominant and marginalized sexual orientation identity groups merge into an overall sexual self-concept that is conscious, truly congruent, and entirely volitional, meaning it's chosen freely and intentionally.
Fully owned.
Fully owned. This status also correlates with a high degree of coherence and consistency among other intersecting identities like gender, race, ethnicity, and religious orientation. It's a truly integrated, harmonious sense of self that embraces all its complexities.
But this is the ideal outcome, an identity that's fully self-defined, authentic, and harmonious with a broader, compassionate social understanding.
Yes, that's exactly right. The model posits only one primary pathway into synthesis. It must occur through deepening and commitment, and crucially, it almost always requires significant active exploration.
Ah, so exploration is key again.
It really is. Individuals who experience deepening and commitment directly from compulsory heterosexuality, what we call committed compulsory heterosexuality, are unlikely to demonstrate all the qualities of synthesis. This is because more active exploration is consistently associated with more affirmative, flexible, and nuanced thinking regarding sexual diversity.
Makes sense.
Individuals in synthesis are highly likely to experience little or no self-stigma or internalized heterosexism homophobia. They understand human sexuality as a continuous and nuanced phenomenon rather than an all-or-nothing binary concept, and they are inherently more affirmative and accepting toward gay, lesbian, and bisexual individuals. They embody genuine understanding and acceptance of human diversity in its fullest sense.
That sounds like a wonderful place to be. Can kids reach this?
Well, this level of synthesis is likely an aspirational state for adults, really. But the foundations for it are absolutely laid in elementary school. A child in a synthesis-like state, relative to their age and developmental stage, might be someone who is remarkably confident in their gender expression, comfortable with their friendships regardless of traditional norms. A.G., a boy who loves playing with girls, a girl who prefers typically boy games, and genuinely accepting and affirming of diversity in others.
The kid who just gets it.
Kind of, yeah. They don't just tolerate differences, they actively affirm them and understand their value. They might be able to articulate why it's important to be kind to everyone, or why different families are all valid and special, indicating an early internal coherence regarding social identity and broader social awareness. They might naturally be the child who stands up for someone being teased for being different.
The little ally.
Exactly. For educators, you can profoundly promote the foundational elements of synthesis by creating a truly inclusive classroom culture. This means actively teaching empathy and respect for all differences, consistently challenging prejudice and stereotypes, whether about gender, race, or family structure, and fostering an environment where children feel safe and encouraged to integrate their various identities, their race, their gender, their interests, their family background, into a coherent and positive self-concept.
Building that strong foundation.
You're creating a secure and nurturing base for later, more complex identity synthesis, helping children build resilience, strong self-esteem, and a truly integrated sense of self as they grow into adults.
This unifying model isn't just compelling theory then. It's backed by rigorous research. You mentioned the authors even developed a specific quantitative tool to measure these statuses across all sexual orientations. That's really impressive given the complexity we've just discussed.
It absolutely is. They developed the measure of sexual identity exploration and commitment, or MOSAIC.
Mosey.
Right. It's a cutting-edge quantitative tool explicitly designed to assess sexual identity statuses among individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation or identity. Initial psychometric investigations, which means scientific studies testing the tool's reliability and validity, have yielded incredibly promising evidence of its accuracy and consistency in national adult samples. It helps researchers move beyond simple self-identification to understand the process of identity.
So it measures the journey, not just the destination label.
Precisely. The MOSI yields 4 empirically derived dimensions. These are factors statistically extracted from real-world data, reflecting key constructs from Marcy's identity theory and this unifying model.
What are the 4 dimensions?
Okay, first is commitment. This dimension captures aspects related to both compulsory heterosexuality and the deepening commitment status. It assesses the degree to which an individual has made a firm commitment to their sexual identity.
Makes sense.
Second, exploration. This directly reflects the active exploration status. It measures the extent to which an individual has actively engaged in questioning, searching, or experimenting with their sexual identity.
Okay, commitment and exploration.
Third, sexual orientation identity uncertainty. This is a fascinating dimension. It reflects what Marcia referred to as moratorium, that delay of commitment during active exploration, or it can signify a reconsideration of existing commitments. It captures that feeling of, I'm not quite sure yet.
Questioning phase.
Exactly. And fourth, synthesis integration, which characterizes the highly integrated and coherent synthesis status we just discussed, reflecting a harmonious and volitional self-concept regarding one's sexuality.
So it provides a measurable way to understand where someone is in this dynamic process, giving us more than just a label. What have the studies using the MOSAIC actually found in real-world populations?
Well, the findings are quite illuminating and truly support the nuances of this universal model. For instance, studies consistently found that sexual orientation identity uncertainty was, as hypothesized by the model, positively correlated with exploration.
So more exploration, more uncertainty.
Often, yes, which makes intuitive sense. Conversely, uncertainty was negatively correlated with both commitment and synthesis, suggesting that as individuals move towards greater commitment and integration, that uncertainty tends to decrease. It's a journey from questioning to clarity.
Okay.
Crucially, bisexual, lesbian, or gay participants tended to endorse these sexual orientation identity uncertainty items more strongly compared to heterosexual individuals.
Which makes sense given the societal norms.
It makes perfect sense, as they often navigate a path that deviates significantly from entrenched societal norms, inherently requiring more deliberate self-inquiry and grappling with internal and external questions.
Right.
Another key finding came from studies with mostly straight women. These women, who identify as primarily heterosexual but acknowledge some same-sex attraction, showed significantly higher levels of identity exploration and uncertainty compared to exclusively straight women. This powerfully highlights the model's ability to capture nuance and variation within what might initially seem like a single homogeneous sexual orientation.
It catches those shades of gray.
Absolutely. It's not just about broad categories. It's about the richness of individual experience.
That's important.
And very significantly, one study found that differences in sexual behaviors among participants did not always equate to differences in sexual identity development status.
Behavior isn't the same as identity status.
Not necessarily. For example, mostly straight women shared similar levels of exploration, uncertainty, and synthesis with both bisexual and lesbian women, despite reporting different patterns of sexual behaviors. This finding strongly supports the universal model's central notion that sexual behavior is only one part of sexual identity.
Right, it's just one piece of the map.
Exactly. It's not the whole map. A person's internal experience and self-understanding are just as, if not more, crucial.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Finally, the research consistently reinforces the model's hypothesis that individuals who have engaged in active exploration are more likely to hold positive attitudes toward LGBT individuals and experience less internalized heterosexism or self-stigma.
Exploration leading to more acceptance again.
Yes. Exploration and sexual orientation identity uncertainty were linked to more positive LGBT affirmative attitudes, things like actively supporting LGBT civil rights, exhibiting comprehensive knowledge, internalizing affirmation, and were negatively related to homonegativity, such as religiously motivated conflict or overt expressions of hate. The studies also reported fascinating links between sexual identity dimensions and age.
Oh.
Age was positively linked with commitment and synthesis integration, suggesting a maturational component.
So we tend towards integration over time.
It suggests that, yes.
Okay.
And links were also found with religiosity, sexual conservatism, and multiple aspects of sexual self-awareness. It's a truly comprehensive picture of how identity unfolds across different facets of life.
That's incredibly powerful. This research reinforces the idea that identity isn't a simple either at any age. Even in elementary school, children might have internal experiences or preferences that don't neatly fit societal boxes. How can you, as an elementary teacher, truly leverage this understanding in your classroom?
Exactly. Knowing about the mosaic's findings on uncertainty and exploration helps teachers understand that these variations in preferences, interests, or even nascent affectional attractions, they are not anomalies. They are normal and healthy parts of human development.
They're just part of the journey.
Right. Think of a boy who passionately loves ballet and prefers playing with dolls, or a girl who excels at and prefers typically boy games like soccer and building with Legos, or the child who innocently questions why all the storybook families in the classroom look exactly the same, a mom, a dad, and 2 kids. These aren't aberrations. They are authentic expressions along a diverse developmental path that could involve exploration and uncertainty.
So don't pathologize difference.
Absolutely not. This research strongly supports the idea that teachers should actively and consciously create spaces where all children feel comfortable expressing their true selves, whatever that may look like, without being forced into predefined categories. This could be as simple yet impactful as ensuring your classroom library has books representing diverse family structures, single-parent families, 2 mom or 2 dad families, families with adopted children.
Representation matters.
Hugely. It means gently challenging gender stereotypes in play or conversation, perhaps by saying, toys are for everyone. It means allowing children to express their interests freely without judgment or redirection, celebrating their unique passions. You're fostering a psychologically safe and inclusive environment where the seeds of healthy, integrated identity can grow naturally and without pressure, preparing them for the complex identity work they'll do later in life.
So what does this all mean for you as an elementary educator just beginning to explore identity and psychology? This isn't just abstract academic theory, is it? It feels deeply practical.
Not at all. It's profoundly practical. This unifying model has direct and far-reaching relevance for educators and future practitioners across all fields. It fundamentally moves us beyond the limiting gay-straight dichotomies that have often constrained our understanding of human sexuality for decades.
Breaking out of the boxes.
Exactly. Instead, it provides a comprehensive, nuanced framework to view sexual identity as a complex, universal developmental process for everyone, a journey that unfolds throughout the lifespan. This fundamental shift in perspective can truly transform how we interact with, understand, and support all individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation.
How can understanding the statuses help practically?
Understanding these 5 statuses, from the pervasive influence of compulsory heterosexuality all the way to the integrated state of synthesis, can help educators and future practitioners develop more targeted and effective interventions related to a wide range of social issues.
Like what?
For instance, it can inform strategies for reducing risky sexual practices, combating anti-gay attitudes and behavior that unfortunately still persist, and effectively addressing the pervasive issues of heterosexism and homonegativity within schools and communities. By understanding an individual's developmental status within this model, interventions can be tailored to be far more effective and developmentally appropriate.
Meeting people where they are in their development.
Precisely. Moreover, the model's inherent potential to integrate sexual identity with other crucial identity types, like racial ethnic identity, gender identity, and religious or spiritual identities, fosters a more holistic understanding of the individual.
Seeing the whole person.
Seeing the whole person. We're not just one identity. We're a rich tapestry of intersecting identities. And this model helps make profound sense of that complexity, highlighting how each thread influences the others.
And for elementary teachers, this isn't about teaching specific, explicit concepts about sexual identity, certainly not at that age, but about building a foundational environment, right?
Yeah.
You're setting the stage for future healthy development.
Absolutely, you've nailed it. Even at the elementary level, a teacher armed with this understanding can contribute to an incredibly powerful preventative approach. By fostering environments of unconditional acceptance where every child feels seen and valued for exactly who they are, by actively challenging implicit biases like those subtle assumptions about gender roles or the unspoken rules about family structures, and by celebrating diversity in its earliest, most innocent forms, whether it's a child's unique interests, their varied friendships, or their family background, educators are implicitly supporting healthier identity development across all children.
So it benefits everyone.
Everyone. This can significantly reduce the potential for distress, internal conflict, and stigma later in life as children naturally move through the various statuses of identity development. You, as a teacher, can act as foundational guides, helping children build robust self-awareness and compassionate social understanding that will serve them through all future identity explorations, no matter what unique path they ultimately choose to take.
We've truly taken a deep dive into sexual identity development today, moving from understanding it as a static set of individual labels to recognizing it as a universal, complex, and deeply human process. We've seen how identity is a dynamic, lifelong journey with different statuses, influenced by both internal feelings and external social contexts.
And we sincerely hope you now see that understanding these nuances, from the pervasive societal influence of compulsory heterosexuality to the integrated, authentic state of synthesis, is not just academic. It offers powerful, actionable insights for fostering supportive, truly inclusive environments for everyone, starting right there in early education. This knowledge empowers you to enable children to navigate their evolving selves with greater confidence, resilience, and significantly less internal conflict.
Consider the profound, almost immeasurable impact a single inclusive comment, maybe a strategically placed diverse book in a classroom library, or just a genuine moment of affirmation can have on a child. How might our collective understanding of identity as a universal, nuanced process, starting from the earliest years of education, truly transform future generations to be more self-aware, compassionate, and accepting of themselves and everyone around them?
There is so much more to learn in the rich and ever-evolving field of identity theory, and we genuinely encourage you to continue your curiosity and exploration of these fascinating concepts.